everyone. Hope you can hear me fine. Good to see many people here. We're happy to present a talk today that is going to be on attacking Samsung Galaxy A family of devices, and in particular their boot chain. Well, we already received a very good introduction, so maybe I can go quickly on this slide. But this is a research that started last year while working at Quarks Lab. And today, here you have me, Damiano, and Maxime, who is going to join me on stage shortly. So this research actually started from a previous research that we had done the year before on the Android Data Encryption Scheme. In this particular research, we wanted to figure out the details of how data encryption at rest works in modern Android. So what we did was we took a phone that had an existing known BootROM vulnerability that we could exploit, and we played with the various internal components that are involved with the encryption of essentially the data that you end up storing on your device. We wanted to know how an attacker would go and try to defeat the schema, how the password or any authentication factor of the user is involved in the process, and we ended up kind of building a bit of a picture of how this whole thing was working. What we're trying to show today is essentially the same thing, but instead of relying on an existing vulnerability, we show how starting from the USB stack, you can effectively obtain the same result. So we are working on, we said, the A family of Samsung Galaxy devices. Here's the specific model we used. It's sort of in the low-end bar of devices. It's relatively cheap. And it runs Mediatek SoC. So there is this mix of Mediatek and Samsung code that is running on the phone. Obviously, Android is the OS, and for the trusted execution environment that we will be talking about on the talk, the OS is Tigris, which is the one developed by Samsung. And again, there is a known BootROM bug that is exploitable using MTK client. It's a nice tool that was built for to exploit this bug and bypass the secure boot. So we didn't use it in the chain, but it was definitely helpful to make debugging easier. So before diving into our work, a bit of introduction, and we start from the Mediatek secure boot process. There are various components involved, obviously, and the first one is the BootROM, obviously, so the very first piece of software that starts executing. The BootROM spawns the preloader, which is this sort of second stage bootloader, which in turn starts three different things. On top, you see the ARM trusted firmware, which is also known as secure monitor. This will stay in execution in the highest privilege level of the secure environment. Then we have Tigris. Tigris is the trusted execution environment operating system. It has both a userland and a kernel, so it runs on two different exception levels. And then we have little kernel. Little kernel is the main Android bootloader running on EL1, and this will give, we will launch Android, so the kernel and the userland. So we will start our talk from little kernel, so the main Android bootloader. But before diving into that, another little bit of introduction on Android partitions. This is just to kind of put everyone on the same page. Android is usually shipped in different partitions that serve different functions and that you can flash or restore independently, more or less. So for example, we have the boot image that has the kernel and RAM disk. VB-meta is used for verified boot. But then we have dynamic partitions that are only parsable by userland. So the super partition is the best example with system, vendor. If you are familiar with Android, these names ring a bell. If you're not, just imagine these as like the building blocks that you can flash on the operating system. And yeah, little kernel has its own partition. And little kernel in general is actually a OS by its own, but is very common as a bootloader in the Android world. It implements some features to recover parts of the system, and in particular, it implements Android Verified Boot, which is the feature that allows to have secure boot and verification of Android images, as well as rollback protection. So Samsung took Little kernel and modified it to include some custom features, such as the Odin recovery protocol, which is Samsung's protocol to recover partitions and flash them, also to updates, these kind of things. Then we have the Knox Security Bit. Knox is a suite of tools that is meant to improve the security of Samsung devices. In particular, the Knox Security Bit is a way to essentially void warranty when bootloader is unlocked. And then we have also a JPEG parser and renderer, which is used to render errors like the ones you see here on the right. So in case something goes wrong at boot time, you have this nice message that tells you what happened. So this version is closed source, obviously, but since Little kernel is open source, reverse engineering is not too complicated because you can help yourself with the open source version. So Max will come on stage now and we'll get to the fun stuff.
Thank you, Danilo. I hope you can hear me well. So the first component that raised our interest was the JPEG parser, that one implemented by Samsung. And this is because the JPEGs are placed into a tar archive that you can find in the partition called BootROM. And this archive is signed, but the signature is never checked at boot. So anyone with the ability to modify the internal memory of the device can actually modify these JPEGs. So it's as a security researcher, it's kind of an interesting primitive, and we all know that sometimes parsing images can be a difficult task. Here we are citing Logofay, which is a research by Barnley that presented last year. That they fuzzed a couple of several image parsers in different boot chains, and they discovered many bugs. So this is definitely something interesting for us. And before we get into this parser, we need to understand how these JPEGs are loaded in Little kernel. So this is the code responsible for that. And as you can see, the first step is that there is a constant size allocation of the heap of the buffer of 1 megabyte. Then you have this function that we call read JPEG file. So the name is the one we gave for reverse engineering, but you get the idea. This function will take the file name as the first parameter, and it will retrieve the corresponding file in the tar archive, and then load the content into the buffer that was previously allocated. And finally, you have this image function that will parse and render the JPEG on screen. Now, some of you may wonder why we have this 0 as the third argument of the read JPEG function. Actually, this third argument is supposed to be a maximum size. So whenever the system looks for a JPEG in the tar archive, it will first read the size from the header, and if the size is bigger than the one provided, it will trigger an error, so that the size will not be read. Unless the size provided is 0, in that case, well, the check is ignored and the file will be read anyway. So we have here first vulnerability. It was quick. It's a heap overflow. And the question for us now is it exploitable? So to answer that question, we need to understand how the heap algorithm works. And in this case, in Little kernel, by default, we have mini heap, which relies on a doubly linked list. So we have a list of 3 chunks that are actually all placed in the same memory pool. They're all following each other, and they all start with the header you see on the right. So we have a pointer, prev pointing to the previous 3 chunk, and a pointer prev, then a pointer, another pointer next, pointing to the next memory chunk, and then the size, and then the contents of the chunk. So if another flow happens, we may override the header of the next chunk, which includes these pointers. And we found a way to turn this into an arbitrary write. This is because how the allocation routine works. So when the system allocates a chunk, a memory buffer, it will remove a chunk from the free list. And to do so, it will dereference the next and prev pointers of the chunk being allocated in order to access the previous and next chunks in the list to in turn modify the pointers next and pref of these two chunks so that they point to each other and not to the current chunk. So it means that basically if we can control these two pointers next and pref of the chunk being allocated, it leads to a write where primitive with the only constraint that both values must be writable addresses. Now, a few words about the mitigations in our little kernel. There are not many, as you can see, no ASLR, no canaries, and more importantly, the heap is executable, which makes the exploitation rather simple. It's quite convenient for us. So the strategy becomes something like this. We use our primitive to overwrite a pointer which we call we jump to, such as the return address in the stack, in this case. And we will make it point to a shellcode that we place inside a JPEG buffer. So to highlight this with a nice schema, here we have a representation of the free list, and you see in purple the JPEG buffer that we just allocated. So the next step is that the system will read the JPEG and will fill the buffer. And at some point, it will overflow, and we will overwrite the next free chunk. And we will replace it with a fake chunk, let's call it like this, where the next pointer points to the return address in the stack, and the pref pointer points to the shellcode. Such that when the next allocation happens, the system will dereference next, and it will replace the return address with the address of the shellcode, and then you know what comes next, I guess. When the function returns, we execute our shellcode. So this is the theory, and to validate that, we implemented a little emulator. So we use Unicode for that. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with Unicode. It's a CPU emulator, meaning that it cannot be used to emulate the full system. So, for example, no interruptions, no hardware, no interaction with hardware. But it's not really a problem in our case because we can really isolate the code that we want to emulate. So. And it's also very straightforward and easy to use. So we implemented this little emulator in which we exploited this vulnerability. But the problem we have then is that the same exploit will not work on the real device. And there are a couple of things that are actually going wrong. The first of them is that the heap and the stack are different in both environments. And the way we solved this was to use the BootROM vulnerability that Melo described. So we basically use this vulnerability to bypass a secure boot. We patch the little kernel and then dump the exact same heap and stack and imported it into an emulator. There is another way to do so, which would rely on reverse engineering because we don't really care about what is inside the memory. We only care about the state of the heap in this context. So we can actually recreate the exact same succession of free and mallocs. Now there is something interesting about this bootloader is that it is quite deterministic. Without ASLR and with the fact that we are actually booting from more or less always the same state, all the addresses, offsets, sizes that you will find in the stack and in the heap will be the same every boot, which is why both solutions would work in this case. So going back on what is going wrong in our exploits, there is also the fact that the heap algorithm will write something at the address shellcode +4, and this is because of the routine removing the chunk from the free list. So we have, you can see here that we will dereference the pref pointer, which is supposed to point to a shellcode, and we will access the second pointer. I mean, the system will overwrite the second pointer, which is next, with something else. So basically we have the second value in our shellcode that is overwritten by the system. And there is an easy way to fix that. We just need to skip the next instruction inside the shellcode. So if you're familiar with the ARM assembly, it looks like this. So we have the first node that will be skipped by the first instruction to add on this for program counter. And the final problem we have is that the heap after the exploits is in, we messed with the free list, so it will crash after the next allocation or after the next free. And there is no easy way to fix that. We need to recreate the free list and such that the heap is in a working state. So with all that being done, we have the same exploit that will work the exact same way on both environments. So So to sum up on this first vulnerability, so we have the CD number you see here, and it leads to code execution in little kernel, and it's persistent. It will survive reboots and factory resets because the partition containing the JPEGs will never be wiped. Also, since little kernel will load Android, so little kernel is running in EL1, but since loading Android, we can, with a little amount of work, we can bypass all the checks and take control over Android. So we will control the full normal world thanks to that bot. And it impacts at least all the Samsung devices we looked into that are based in Mediatek System-on-Chips, which includes those that are fixed the BootROM vulnerability we mentioned. Now there is still one issue we have regarding our objective, which is to take control over the full system, is that we need a way to flash these JPEGs on the device without being already privileged. So how to do this? This is the question we ask now and the one we will try to answer. So for that we will look into Odin, which is the recovery protocol designed by Samsung that is also implemented in little kernel, and it basically allows to flash partition through USB. So you have a closed source client that is called also Odin. That is the one, the official one, let's say. But there is also an open source one that is quite useful because it works very well on Linux. You can use it in command line in scripts. It's Angle, and it's the one we use in our proof of concepts. Internally, Odin works as the following. So first of all the images flashed to Odin must be authenticated. But they must contain a signature in the footer. We have an example here on the slide what the signature must look like. And internally, there are two structures that Odin will use to do so. So the first one is the partition information table that we also call the bit. And there is also a global array that indicates which partition to authenticate. So the partition information table is actually placed into a static address in the eMMC, and it describes the partitions. They also each partition has an entry in the bit. You see an example on the right. And it will give some information such as the size of the partition, the name, where it starts, and so on. And a partition that is not present in the bit cannot be flashed through Odin. Although the bit can be updated, but as you can imagine, it requires a signed image. Now, regarding authentication, we have this global array I mentioned, and it will describe which partition must be authenticated and how to authenticate them. And what is interesting, however, is that an image that is not part of this array will not be authenticated. It does not require authentication. So if we compare the bit that gives the list of all partitions that can be flashed and this array indicating the one requiring authentication, we end up with a list of partitions that we can flash without authentication. Now, just a quick note on this list. The up-param partition, the one containing the JPEG, is not part of them because it is authenticated. But there are other interesting partitions that we can actually flash. And two of them are PGPT and SGPT. GPT stands for GUID partition table. So the GPT is similar to the bit in the sense that it describes the partitions. And you'll find similar information, the names, the sizes, and so on. And you can see that it's quite an interesting, quite a powerful primitive, the fact that we can flash without authentication the headers of this GPT table. It means that we can, through USB, reshape the GPT table. Now, a few words about GPT versus bit. So, as you know, as I explained, they are used for the same thing. The bit is actually used for Samsung features, such as Odin, such as the JPEG loading. So the apparent partition is actually retrieved through the bit and not through the GPT table. And the GPT is used for the rest of the time, like for loading the Android partitions, for example. And the bits, so when the system starts, it will execute this little routine you see in order to load the bit in memory. So as I explained, we have this this hard-coded address, which is where the system by default will read the bit from. But there is also this interesting routine. The system will try to look for a bit partition, and if there is one, it will read it from there. So on all the devices we looked into, there was no such bit partition. However, it's quite interesting because the code is there anyway, and these two functions rely on the GPT table. And we can actually change this GPT table. So we came up with the following strategy. Here is a representation of the flash memory. You see the PIT and GPT pointing to the same partitions. And the first partition you see, MD5 HDR, is actually one of those we can flash without authentication. So we will replace this partition with a new param partition containing our malicious JPEGs. The second partition, DB-meta vendor, is also flashable without authentication, and it's empty, it seems not to be used. So we will replace it with a new bit, which is a copy of the original, except that we will rename MD5 HDR into param, and we do the other way around with param. And the final step is that we will modify the GPT table in order to rename DB-meta vendor into bit, such that at next boot the system will not read the original bits but will read the new one, and whenever it will try to print JPEGs on screen, it will look for the new apparent partitions and the vulnerable JPEGs. And it actually works. You see on the screen dots showing up, it means that the exploit worked. So the JPEGs are loaded, but we still have a little problem. Android won't boot, and it is because the DB-meta vendor partition is not present in the GPT table, even though it's not really needed for anything. So there is an easy way to overcome this problem. We simply take another partition that seems to be useless, in this case the SPU partition, and we rename it DB-meta vendor. And with that done, it actually works, the device will boot and everything will be fine. So to sum up on this second vulnerability, we have a bypass, an authentication bypass in Odin that we can use to flash more or less anything we want on the eMMC, which includes the apparent partition. And this vulnerability impacts most Samsung devices, at least all of those we looked into, that's all using Mediatek System-on-Chips. Now, before I get to the demo, a few words about post-exploitation, because remember that our ultimate goal is to take control over the Android system, and so far we are executing code in little kernel. And the best way, the easiest way for us to control Android is to modify the Android partitions that described at some point. And the problem is that we have this ADB Android verified with feature that will complain if the partitions are different from the original ones. So for that, we implemented a little routine in our shellcode that will simply patch all the checks to basically not there. And this is quite easy to do because the memory is already writable, so code of little kernel is both executable and writable, so no need to play with it. I will call Daniel on stage to help me with the demo. So there is a video in case it doesn't work, but I'm sure it will work. Okay, so we have to film actually the device. I hope you can see the device. Okay. So basically, this is a normal device. And let me first show you something. Basically, obviously, I enabled ADB for this demo. And what I want to show you is that SU, when I try to call SU, which is used to get root privileges on Android, it doesn't work, which is the expected behavior for a normal standard on device, all right? So far, so good. So what I will do now is simply shut down the device. So, not like this. So here I unlocked the device, but you can actually power off this device by pressing all the buttons together for a couple of seconds. Okay, then I will start it in the download mode, so you can also do this without being privileged, or without having the user password. So now I started the Odin mode and I will launch the exploit. So basically the exploit will flash the partitions as I described it. And here you should see the device rebooting because there is this little trick I'm not going to explain, but basically we are flashing some Android partitions to take control over it. And once it's done, the device will reboot, and you should see Dodge showing up, which means that the exploit worked. Now we will have to wait a bit. The device, it's true, is taking a bit of time to start. So if there are some Samsung employees in the room, maybe this is this is one of the things that could be improved. So. Okay, so I connect again to ADB, and you see SU is working, and we're all good. It works. Okay, thank you. Okay. To conclude on the first part of this presentation, so we have a chain of two blocks that chain together leads to code execution in the kernel. It is persistent. It impacts many Samsung devices of the Galaxy A family, which is based on Mediatek System-on-Chips. And we can trigger this through USB and take control over the full normal world, which includes Android. But there are still some secrets in Android that are stored in the protected with the secure world. And they are still hidden from us. So we wanted to show you something complete. So Damiano will now show you how to retrieve these secrets.
Yes. So, well, I mean, the talk could be over now, right? We could all go for lunch and forget about this part. But if you remember the system architecture from the slide I presented before, there is this whole part of the system that goes by the name of secure word, which we haven't touched yet, and is, for the moment at least, still very secure. We compromised everything that is in the bottom part, so little kernel and Android, but we haven't touched anything on top of the client. But so what we want to show for the next 10 minutes or so is that maybe secure is not the best word to describe this part of the word. And to do so, we're going to start from the secure monitor. Just to give you a little bit more context, the secure monitor is the critical component that makes sure there can be communication between the non-secure world and the secure world. So what happens, imagine that there is at some point some application or some system service in the Android system that wants to perform an operation that needs to happen in the secure world. Well, there will be a chain of calls. Here the example is an encryption with a key. So you will have a chain of calls that end up in the HAL layer. This at some point will also boil down to a daemon that will talk to the kernel. And the kernel at some point will send an SMC, which is a special instruction in ARM chips that triggers an exception that will be handled by the EL3 monitor. So the kernel triggers this SMC, the monitor takes it, and based on the ID decides what to do. Basically, either it solves whatever needs to be done internally in the monitor, or it forwards the request to the Tigris kernel, which will probably in turn talk with the key master trust application. Why do we want to look at the monitor? Because that's the most critical component, right? Whatever needs to go to the secure world passes through the monitor. And also because the code is pretty simple. You have these handlers, and these handlers are reachable from the kernel. However, the code is, as I said, simple. There's a lot of hardware interaction, so fuzzing is not really feasible. What we went for to review this code was just static analysis. So we talked about Tigris a little bit. I'll go quickly over it because we are actually running out of time. But it's the OS for trust zone designed by Samsung. It comes in different partitions that include different components that magically come together. If you want to learn more about it, actually, we're not going to do much here. But there are obviously very good references from research that happened in the past. For example, Rescure published a series of blog posts that were very interesting and useful. So obviously ATF is also closed source, or at least this version. So what we do is we take the image and we want to look for the part where there is a header with a footer with a signature. The very code starts where you see the MTK, TPE magic in some sense. And when you load it in your favorite disassembler, the thing you want to look for is SMC handlers. So usually there's, well, in this case there's two. One is because there's two ways the communication can happen. Either the kernel wants to talk to the secure world, or the secure world wants to talk with the kernel. The interesting one for us is the one exposed to the kernel. And then you have these arguments that are literally the registers that are set before calling the SMC. So we started looking at these SMC handlers, and we very quickly ended up on some interesting ones. So this is the one corresponding to that SMC ID. And as you can see, it almost feels like a arbitrary read bring, right? Because you have an argument that is fully controlled by the attacker, fed into some array, and the value is returned. But the argument isn't really ever checked, which means anyone can talk to this. Anyone that can talk to this SMC handler can essentially read some value in the SMC, in the ATF memory. Yeah. So this means we have an interesting read primitive that, however, only gives us access to the memory of the address space of the monitor, which is still pretty interesting, but it can't really give us much because of other software, because the interesting secrets actually lay in the trusted applications usually. So it would be actually nice if we could map the secrets we wanted right into the address space of ATF. Well, it turns out that there is actually a way to do that, and it's actually not so complicated. There is another SMC handler that corresponds to the ID you see on the slides now. Here, SPM actions is again not a real name. It's the one we gave while doing reverse engineering, but we guess it has something to do with power management. And what happens is that you can pass an address and a size to this function that come from the arguments, and basically go over a memory map. So you can tell the monitor, please map in your address space from this address, this size. And yes, these arguments aren't really checked. So we get to another vulnerability, which perhaps by itself is not extremely serious because you just map memory. But given the fact that we have the previous vulnerability, if we combine them, it means that we can map arbitrary memory from the secure world and then read it back. The only limit that we are limited to 8 megabytes, then since we cannot unmap, the system will start to be quite unstable, but that's not a big deal. That's still a lot of space, a lot of stuff that we can do. And actually, we can use this vulnerability to end up leaking Keystore keys, which is kind of the ultimate level of things that you want to leak. I will be quick, I swear. There is 3 protection levels that you can have for Android keys, essentially. You can have software keys, TEE protected keys, which is the case we're going to describe now, and then strongbox protected keys, which are keys that will end up being used in security chips for the phones that have them. The idea is that the raw key material should never leave the protected environment it belongs to. So the way it happens actually in practice is that the normal world, as we saw before, at some point we want to perform some operation with the key. So the key is actually stored in the file system in encrypted form. So it will send this key to the environment of choice, either the key master trusted application or the trusted chip, again when the phone has one. And this thing will take the key out of this blob using some secrets that are internal to the TA of the chip, use the key, and then return the result of the operation without ever revealing that key. So yeah, there is the content of the key is what we want to do. And how can we do that? Again, we described the bugs before, and we want to look for the key master memory. So you're going to ask, where's going to be the key master memory? Well, we have some logs that are easily available. These are little kernel logs, even though it says K message, well, K is little kernel in this case. Or at least an early boot with the little kernel messages end up here. And we have some physical addresses that are expressed here. There's one that looks pretty interesting that says TEE reserved. And well, it turns out that that's where keymaster and the other trusted applications are loaded in memory. You can tell that because of the many strings that the trusted applications have. And again, the binaries are stored in memory, so you can pretty much compare these strings and make sure that you're looking at the right thing. So at this point, our POC becomes more or less clear, I guess. We import a key into the Android Keystore. We encrypt using that key, but we stop the execution right after the begin operation is called. So in a moment where the key will be present in plain text in the memory of the key master TA, and then we leak it. So translated to code, this is something like this. We are importing actually a key that we already know. We will explain later why. But obviously any key can be leaked. So going over the same schema again, we hook the key master HAL to get to intercept the execution right at the moment where we can leak, and then when we actually do the leak, we see the key appearing in the buffer that we read. But yeah, so again, we are leaking a key we already knew. So we could do better than this. But again, this is really just for practicality. The thing is that you see around, there's a bunch of almost random things. We could figure out the right offsets, but maybe they change, who knows. It's easier to brute force at the end of the day. There are not that many options. So we can try all possible keys from the leak to the cipher text that we actually have. And we will be able to actually find the key, even if we didn't know about it. So to show you this, we have another demo for which I need Max again. So no need for the camera this time, because we So we prepared a little demo application, which is going to appear on screen soon, which essentially does what you have seen from before. So I'm going to wait for Max to launch the script that will give us, that will use Frida to intercept the messages that we care about. So here now he's launching the Frida server. By the way, Frida is a common instrumentation framework that I haven't introduced because many people know about it. But if you don't, have a look, it's really cool. So we look at the logs just because we are going to be logging some, like the ciphertext, just to make it easier to enforce. And can I? Okay. So I'm going to write my dirty secret here, encrypt. And here in the logs, if stuff is working, yes, you're going to be able to see the ciphertext and the initialization vector. Now, once we have done that, we can use the exploit I explained about. Actually, I haven't fully explained how to do it because you have to be in the kernel, right? So we wrote a custom kernel module that will be able to send the SMC calls we need. We haven't gone over that part because it's maybe the least interesting. But anyway, we end up leaking some memory out of 100, out of the ATF address space, which is stored in the summary file system. So now Max is pulling it from the yes, the file system, and then we'll launch a script that will try all the possible keys in this link to find the secret using the ciphertext and ID that we got. They're not secret. So yeah, there's just a little bit of base 64 magic, a bit of pressure on Max that needs to type all of this. Maybe you can raise the sign with the time again. Like, you're out of time. Be faster. All right, and then yes. Fingers crossed. The determinism is helpful once again. So yeah, the key is again the one that. But I mean, we can show you the sources if they weren't super dirty, but I'm sure you can trust that we are not. All right, so let me go back to the presentation. Yes. So to wrap up, we presented a total of 4 vulnerabilities today that led to bypassing the authentication that happens in Odin. And this allowed us to flash an image that was malicious and that would be able to exploit the vulnerability in the parsing logic in little kernel. This gave us code execution in the bootloader, and then allowed us to ship backdoor. And then using 2 other bugs in the secure world, we leaked some memory, including Keystore keys that are supposed to be protected. So all these vulnerabilities have been found in sort of low-end Samsung devices. And as you can see, they're relatively simple at the end of the day, but very impactful, also due to the lack of mitigations that we found in the various components that we exploited. So this kind of shows how challenging it is to manufacture these devices and maintain the security features, especially when they're at early boot, but at the same time it's also unfortunate because they were relatively low-hanging fruits. But anyway, all the vulnerabilities are now fixed, and we also thank Samsung that was super reactive in making sure that these get the patches. And with that, we are done, so we are happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Maxi and Damiano. So I think we are out of time, so we don't have time for the Q&A, but I think if you guys have any questions, you guys can take them off stage. So right now we'll break for lunch, but before that, just one announcement. The hardware hacking challenge for the Octopus batch will cut off at 4 p.m, so be sure to demo your solutions at the hardware hacking village before that. So the next talk will resume at 1:50. So lunch will be at level 2 at 9. Level 2 will only level 2 will have food for vegetarians, so vegetarians please proceed to level 2. And that'll be all. Thank you.